tuned in to the Andrew Lawton Show.
I've always said if you're not a gun owner or you don't particularly like guns, you should still pay attention to this issue because it is a property rights issue. If the government has the right to take away your property, to reclassify things, to say you're no longer allowed to own this, if they can do it with guns, they could do it with cars. They could do it with anything else you own conceivably. Or like what we were seeing in the UK a couple of years ago, going after pointy knives because some celebrity chef decided that he should play by different rules than others. Well, yesterday, Marco Mendicino came out and discussed what the Liberals are doing on their firearms control bill C-21. This is a bit of a primer that Marco Mendicino gave.
I'm proud to announce a package of reforms that will strengthen both Bill C-21 and Canada's ban on AR-15 assault-style firearms. Significantly, the amendments will include a standard technical definition which contain the physical characteristics of an assault-style firearm. This definition, which would apply going forward, would be inserted into the criminal code. I want to remind you of something. In the last election, the Conservative Party pledged to get rid of our ban on assault-style firearms. These amendments will ensure that any future government will have a very, very difficult time making assault-style firearms legal again.
Now, Marco Mendicino, I should say, is a guy where, we in the firearms community refer to 22 as a caliber. Marco Mendicino refers to 22 as IQ. He is not the brightest guy. He doesn't understand the file, and he thinks that if he keeps saying assault-style firearms, assault-style weapons, that it'll make it more true. But it's playing off of ignorance in Canadians who don't understand guns, and in many cases just haven't been exposed to them. And this little amendment is trying to deal with some of the bad press and pushback they got from their previous proclamations that they would be banning, by their own admission, hunting rifles and hunting shotguns. But it's hardly a reprieve. Joining me is Rod Giltaca from the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights. Rod, explain to me first off what's different. What's actually changed here from the previous iterations of C-21?
Thanks for having me on, Andrew. The approach has changed, but the results are the same as the withdrawn amendments and could possibly be worse. So the approach, well, the announcement that Marco made was a couple of new amendments to Bill C-21, and also he's talking about some regulations and some other things that feed into it. So I guess the most efficient and quick way to explain this is if we're talking about the actual gun bans that they have in store for Canadians, instead of having a list and having a definition, as they did in the amendments G4 and G46 that were withdrawn, they now have no list, they have a definition, and they're telling Canadians, well, don't worry, everything that you own today is fine, it's safe, it's only this definition of a prohibited firearm being semi-automatics with detachable magazines, basically, will only go forward when this when Bill C-21 receives royal assent. So it's just for the future. But also, we're reforming CFAC, which is the Canadian Firearms Advisory Committee, and they will determine what firearms that should be prohibited in the interim, and then we will prohibit those firearms using orders in council. So, and there's no criteria mentioned by the minister. So basically, it's a committee made up by the people that he wants on there. They could just take the list that was G46 and just go down the list and say, this is what we recommend. But they could continue past and say, well, rapid fire firearms like lever actions or pump actions should be on the list too. There's no telling where this will go eventually.
And they're certainly not in this, I don't even want to call it a walk back because it really isn't, but they're not unbanning any firearms. I mean, the things that they banned by order in council in May 2020, the 1,500 variants, including AR-15 style firearms and so on, like those are going to remain banned. So, which I think proves the point here that they're just going to find a way to apply this new definition to whatever they don't want people to have.
Well, they're basically calling everyone stupid. They're saying you're all so dumb that will say, oh, we're going to walk back all these things. We're not banning hunting rifles until it's like, well, here's the hunting rifles they're banning. And then they're like, well, and then Justin Trudeau came out, if you remember, and said, well, yes, maybe some of these guns are on different, and all while screaming about misinformation and disinformation and how terrible people like us are, the gun lobby. Well, they got caught with all that. They walked it all back because it was a public relations disaster for them, because it's really all about politics. It's all about votes and splitting Canadians, right? Well, now they're saying, oh, don't worry, we're not taking anything, but we can't control the committee that we set up. It's their fault. It's just basically a strategy so that they can sidestep accountability for doing exactly the same thing that they were going to do in the first place.
I want to play a clip for you, Rod. This is from the gun control activist group called Poly, colloquially, and their criticisms of this. And I want to get your take on this afterwards.
This is it for you?
We cannot understand how we can have a real strong, permanent ban on assault-style weapon. How? With which government? Mr. Mendicino today says that to complete the list, it will ask a committee. I've been on that committee, and we never decided anything. And they were a majority government. They never consulted us on anything strong. And they table and get adopted Bill C-71. So they cannot tell me that's a strong measure, first. Their definition is not strong. But why would the Liberal government propose a new bill on gun control? They say that it's very great and the strongest thing in this generation. If that's it, we're lost.
Now, I don't want to take away from, the horrific event that the members who formed this group initially went through back in 1989. Canadians are very well aware of it, and I think it's often been used quite wrongfully to push an agenda that has nothing to do with that horrific tragedy. And as we see now, that this group is basically wanting gun control to the point where guns are just completely prohibited in Canada, and anything short of that they don't like. But the problem, when you have an initiative like this that's derided by gun control advocates and gun advocates, does it not give the government a bit of cover to say, see, it's moderate?
Well, as I said before, their plan now is to sidestep all accountability. And yeah, I mean, it's, I think they were successful in dividing Canadians in the last couple of elections based on the silhouette of an AR-15. And, conservatives want to weaken gun control and liberals want to strengthen it, all the rest of this rhetoric. But gun control is a sword that cuts both ways, right? So if you think that your votes are in urban centers and the voting profile of the people that are going to support you are pro-gun control because they don't know any better, let's say, just for sake of argument, then you're going to try to get those votes and consider the law-abiding gun owners to be a smaller pool of votes for you, and somehow you'll win an election. I think it's worked reasonably well for them, but I think, and this is my fantasy that you'll just indulge me in for a minute. I think that Canadians are starting to wake up a little bit. They're realizing that our violence problem is not licensed gun owners shooting at shooting clubs like we have for 150 years in Canada, by the way, since before Canada was a country. Our issues are the opioid epidemic, which is just being made worse by liberal policies. Disastrous prolific offender issues, as made worse by the liberal Bill C-75, that law enforcement across the country have said, you need to repeal Bill C-75. It's making our streets unsafe to even walk on. So bail reform issues and a raging gang problem. Like, Canadians, I think, are starting to figure it out that they've been gaslit for 7.5 years and it's just not working for them. So now they're putting a little bit more effort into kind of walking things back and repackaging the same product and whatnot. I think they're dancing a little bit. Now they haven't made anybody happy.
No, and I'm looking at what Marco Mendicino has said here, and again, as we've discussed, it's not really going to make a material difference if you are a gun owner. They can tweak the process or say they're tweaking the process, but we know the outcome they want. And basically, we're seeing a government, and correct me if I'm wrong, that will not stop until every semi-automatic firearm has been prohibited.
Well, but it won't stop there, and this we've been telling the hunting community for a long time. How confident are you that the Liberals are just going to stop just short of the firearms that you own? Like, they're going to be like, okay, well, we got the AR-15s and even wooden, stocked firearms that could be like the SKS that we still think are assault weapons. We've got those. Well, you know what? We're on a roll. Why would they stop there? So at the end of the day, they want you to have a break action, if at all, or a bolt action, and maybe that'll be what's left. Yeah. I mean, I think they've demonstrated as a political party after running Canada for 7.5 years, they can't be trusted. They'll never say what they actually want. It's a real mess, and I think it has backfired on them. I'd like to think so.
The one thing that Marco Mendicino mentioned there that I found I found a lot of it concerning. I found all of it concerning, actually, but one in particular is when he talked about effectively trying to bind future governments. He said the Conservatives have already said they want to roll this back and have more gun rights. What is he referring to there? And is he correct that a Pierre Poilievre government, theoretically, who has been on the record as opposing this gun control, that he would actually have difficulty untangling this? Is that the case?
Well, so the original way that they were going to do it with both amendments, G4 and 46, where they were going to legislate these firearms as prohibited. So right now they want to legislate a definition of what an assault style firearm is. But
which
no
will
list.
be different from any real definition, as we've known. I mean, the PR definition for that the government uses is not anything that exists in Canada.
Well, if you look at Paulie Saint-Sylvain's press release, they called everything assault weapons. They said assault weapon. I counted because I have the video. Counted like 8 times. They called them assault weapons. But nonetheless, it's a propaganda war, first and foremost. But the firearms that they ban using an order in council can be repealed by a minority government in the future. The firearms that they ban, either by definition or by name, that are in legislation, they would need a majority government or a coalition government to repeal that. So that's the difference. So, I mean, if I'm really searching around for something positive, it would be Marco saying, well, we're gonna ban these things by OIC because that can be reversed. But it's one thing legally and it's another thing politically, because no government, including the Conservatives, want to be a one-term government. So it'll be just as much work for organizations like ours to get these firearms and rights back as it will fighting the Liberals for the last 7.5 years.
The one thing that strikes me here is that the Liberals don't even believe their own fear-mongering. And one example, you were featured, and the CCFR was a very generous supporter of the documentary we reproduced a couple of years ago called Assaulted. And at the time, we did that around this time in April of 2021. And it had been about a year since this order in council came in. And we talked to a lot of gun owners and gun business owners who had said, yeah, my AR-15 inventory and all this other inventory was prohibited. The government put a freeze on it immediately. We're still saddled with it. The government said it's dangerous to have these things out in the country. Well, 2 years have passed since then, 3 years since the ban, and this buyback that they've promised still hasn't materialized, and we still haven't seen this rash of so-called assault weapon crime in Canada to back up what the Liberals said was the necessary and inevitable outcome of these guns existing. So, I mean, their own fear, like if it was that urgent, they would have figured this out and collected all these things by now.
Well, you would have thought they would have figured it out before they made the announcement that they were going to do this in short order. But another thing I would point out to your viewers is that all this talk about gun control, so right from the Liberals' first majority government where they brought out Bill C-71, you had the May 2020 gun ban, that OIC, you had the handgun freeze, you've got C-21 coming down the pike at us. And it's like, well, Canada is more dangerous than it's ever been right now. And yet back in the Harper era in 2013, it was that year had the lowest level of firearm-related violence since StatsCan started collecting data on firearm-related violence. And we had far less gun control. We didn't have all this gun control. So it's funny, you got these advocates that are like, well, less guns in a society, more firearm regulation, less violence. And it's like, well, clearly that's those two things don't correlate at all. So it's just kind of an interesting phenomenon in real life.
Yeah, I think we need more bail control right now, not more gun control to deal with crime. Rod Giltaca from the CCFR. I will see you in a few weeks for CCFR members out there. I'll be at the annual general meeting in June. So I thank you for the invitation and thanks for coming on today, Rod.
Thank you, and we'll see you then.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.